Jonathan Kuminga watch, you've officially put it to bed, right?
For now.
We may have some insight as to why it possibly never really had a chance to happen as far as Jonathan Kuminga coming here. Nice enough to join us, the great John Dickinson, podcast, radio host, KNBR, Warrior Insider. JD, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure. How are you this evening?
What's up, fellas? Good to be with you, as always. I hope you can hear me loud and clear here.
Yes, sir.
Via the technology. I always have to make sure I check, but it's good to be on with you guys. Good to be on in Sacramento every once in a while.
Of course, yeah. John Dickinson from Sacramento. Used to work at this station now, and of course you and John and I worked at the same station for a while.
Back in the day.
Yeah, that's right. JD, were the Warriors always somewhat reluctant to send Jonathan Kuminga to Sacramento?
Short answer, yes. But I think there's a number of different reasons why. I think when you go back to the summer, there were really two players that interested the Warriors on the Kings roster. And one was Keon Ellis and the other would have been Keegan Murray. And I think even the interest in Keegan Murray was reported that there wasn't even a whole heck of a lot of that. And then obviously once he ended up with the contract extension, that was going to be completely gone. Obviously that happened later than the summer when there was the back and forth on Kuminga between the Warriors and the Kings. But yeah, the Warriors were really only interested. They weren't interested in this Malik Monk and the fake, first round pick, which wasn't really going to convey because it was lottery protected and the Kings were going to be a team that was never not, I think, going to be in the lottery. I didn't think there was a scenario where the Kings were not going to be in the lottery this year. Mm-hmm. I think the Warriors probably would have thought that. So the other thing was, they were never interested in DeRozan. I know that got thrown out a little bit after Jimmy Butler went down with the season-ending ACL. Could he be kind of a stopgap wing type player that could help him get through the remainder of the season and just try to remain competitive? But as far as the Malik Monk, potential trade with the first round pick and the Kings being able to get their hands on Kuminga, the salary for Monk was never something that interested the Warriors. The salary and the length of the contract, that was a bad contract. The basketball fit, shoot first, ball dominant, kind of a guard. The Warriors have a lot of guards. They were looking more for wings than guards. And Ellis at least can compete defensively more as a wing than a guard. Although I think you could even make the case he's more of a guard than a wing.
Yes.
So the basketball fit, it was not something. The Warriors also would have had to have included Moses Moody in that deal, or potentially Buddy Hield in that deal, because if you remember, the Warriors could only take the base year compensation rule. The Warriors could only take back half of what Kuminga's salary was going to be. And so if let's just use the $22.5 million Kuminga wound up getting, the Warriors could only take $11 million back. So they would have had to have added another, player to the deal to even take Malik Monk back in return. And the Warriors just were not going to do that. It was never going to be a deal where it was Kuminga and Moody for Malik Monk and this fake first round pick. And then the other part of it, and I put this out there, and I think this is why Alan had suggested that maybe you guys wanted to have me on. The Warriors don't have a lot of fans, from what I've heard, a lot of Malik Monk fans in their locker room. And it's twofold. It's basically, one, he did stand up on the podium in between Game 6 and Game 7 on that Saturday afternoon, where Steph Curry was imploring Warrior young players who wants to get on the bus and go to Sacramento. But he basically called the Warriors old and busted. Monk did in between Game 6 and Game 7, after the Kings had gone into Chase Center and dominated Game 6 to even the series. And so he basically called the Warriors old and busted and cooked. And then Steph went in there and dropped 50 on him in Game 7 and said, not so fast. The other thing is, it's the Mike Brown situation. Mike Brown has a ton of fans in the Warriors locker room, among the championship core of Warrior players and staff and coaches and the like. And I had heard that Monk would not have been the most welcome player in the Warriors locker room because of the fact that he played a hand in Mike Brown ultimately getting fired, along with obviously Domantas Sabonis and others. that have been reported on through time. So I just kind of threw that out there. It was never like they were gone being interested in him in July and August. And this is something I've talked about on a lot of my shows, it just kind of in passing. So I don't think it's really a big thing, but it was one of maybe 5 or 6 things that I've laid out with you why the Warriors were never going to do this Malik Monk deal, where even with the first round pick, because they would have had to have added to the deal to bring him in.
Yeah, JD, just to follow up on that, do you think what Malik's perceived responsibility was in that? Mike Brown has been around for a very long time. So as we were kind of questioning, some of these guys on the Kings, DeMar, Malik, their value and why teams weren't terribly interested, do you think that's something with Malik that could expand past the Warriors, or do you think it was a specific Warriors thing and the rest was just, we just don't like Malik's contract and the type of player he isn't really what a lot of teams are looking for right now?
I don't know beyond the Warriors. And so I wouldn't speculate or report on that. But it could be. Again, I don't know that it is or isn't. I think players develop their own reputations fairly or unfairly around the league. And look, for players that may not be inclined to be welcoming of let's say Malik Monk in their locker room because of reason X, Y, or Z, there may be another 3 players on another team that are like, he was right. I agree with that guy. I've talked for years about the fact that I'll use a Warriors example quickly. I've talked for years about the fact that the way things went down between the Warriors and Kevin Durant over the years that Kevin Durant was with the Warriors, the 3 years, by the end, I think there were a lot of players around the NBA that basically thought that Kevin Durant didn't get the credit that Kevin Durant deserved and even took more flack than maybe he should have. But I think there's players around the league that agree. And based on the way the Kevin Durant thing went down between the Warriors at the end, I think it has actually hurt. And I've said this on my shows. I think it's actually hurt the Warriors' ability to be able to acquire other star players. And again, a small part, but a part indeed, in addition to, all of the other reasons why the Warriors ended up having kind of a dormant night and morning here over the last 24 hours.
John Dickinson, nice enough to join us, and JD covers he covers the Warriors, but he does cover the Kings at a lot of Kings games. Did the Kings dodge a bullet by not getting Kuminga, JD? In my opinion, they did. What do you think?
I think they did. Although, as Alan said, who knows? I mean, he could find their way. He could find his way back to Sacramento at some point if things don't work out. With Atlanta here, I mean, he is somebody that the Hawks are obviously going to get a 2-month test. On whether he fits with them or not, and then they can choose to let him go and become a free agent. They could choose to keep him and trade him. They could choose to keep him and keep him. So as far as Kuminga is concerned, I mean, he's got to play and play well to earn that next year on his contract, first and foremost here in the last 2 months, or at least intrigue Atlanta enough to pick it up. But at that point, depending upon how he plays, I mean, all of those options are still on the table. To answer your question, I do think the Kings dodged a bullet on Kuminga and not getting him. The one thing I will say, though, to that is Kuminga did need to go to a situation where winning was not the most important thing. And if he had been, traded to Sacramento at some point here, even going back to last summer or last night or this morning or however it would have shaken out at some point in between, the Kings, I do think, would have given him the opportunity to just go play and make mistakes. And again, the Kings obviously are not concerned about winning right now, which is, I think, an environment that Kuminga needs to attempt to develop his game. The issue with Golden State, much of it was the fact that he was far more concerned about being a star than he was about trying to be a role player that could fit along with Stephen Curry and eventually Jimmy Butler and in the Steve Kerr system and all that. They did give him more opportunities to be a role player in certain ways than I think, some would believe that they did. And he was just really defiant and or unable I think for the first 4 years, I think he tried at the beginning of this year, but through those first, he just was kind of a guy that had his own agenda and believed that he was so talented that, he should be afforded luxuries of just going out there and scoring is kind of the only thing I need to do because I'm a scorer. And if I can score 20 a night and be a 1 or a 2 option in that vein, I don't need to defend or rebound or even be all that efficient. And I think the Kings, to kind of bring it back to them, would have given that runway. He's got a number of fans in their front office, at least one that may be higher on him in BJ Armstrong, to my understanding, higher on him than anybody in the league as far as what his talent could be. That being said, though, I do think, he was looking for kind of a losing environment, in my opinion, to go into and be able to do whatever he wanted and make the situation work for him to where he could get paid. And, as time would have gone on, I think the Kings and I think other organizations probably will find that winning isn't necessarily the most important thing. Again, it wouldn't have been an issue this year, maybe next year, but at some point the Kings were going to want to win again. And I think over that time, they would have found that the best chance to win with Jonathan Kuminga would be the lower he is on the pecking order. And he's somebody that wants to be at the top of a pecking order, be a 1 or a 2 here and be paid as such and be treated as such in terms of the things that are put on his shoulders.
Yeah, JD, we kind of had a memoriam for the Kuminga content.
We did. A little funeral. Yeah, a little service.
That carried us. We had a eulogy that carried us through the summer. So as we are moving forward from that
wait,
now.
Alan, a eulogy? I'll let you finish. A eulogy? I don't know if you know this, but Whitey at one point had a funeral for something, and that didn't go too well. I don't know if he's told that story.
I shared that with Alan yesterday.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, so he may be coming eventually.
That's right. It might be the comeback, right? People don't want to hear that, JD.
If Pastor Whitey got up and eulogized, then I don't know.
There you go. But as we kind of look back on the summer and, at one point he was going to be here. I think he's going to be here by the weekend, things like that. The one question I had for you as we were texting a lot during this time, as we look at where Kuminga is now and where Keon Ellis is now and the Kings getting back a 28-year-old DeAndre Hunter, at the time there was conversations about Keon being pseudo-blocked from Kuminga conversations. If that wasn't the case, do you think it could have gotten done? Did you hear anything about if Keon was included, maybe this thing would have went in a different direction or no?
I don't think it would have, because I still think it wouldn't have meant that the Warriors would have been willing to take Monk. That I will say, and that would have been just more salary that would have had to have been added to the deal. I still say, and look, I understand why the Kings didn't want to do this even going back to the summer, but I think that the deal that would have gotten done, and again, people in Sacramento are going to be like, JD, this guy's crazy. I don't care if he's from Sacramento originally or not, but the one player and the salary at the time that would have made sense would have been before the extension, when Keegan Murray was basically making right around 11 and had not signed the extension. And if the Warriors had traded Kuminga at a 22-ish rate, then half of 22, Keegan Murray would have fit exactly into the half of, the base year compensation rule. The numbers would have matched. But again, at that point, if you're Sacramento, ultimately they signed him to a pretty massive extension. So the Kings were looking to build around him. So that was going to be off the table for the Kings. Yeah. But my understanding is those were the two players. But Ellis doesn't make enough. That's the other thing. Like if Ellis made more money, I think maybe it would have been something that could have been considered. But I think that is what made this deal so difficult to kind of come to fruition here over the months.
Yeah, John Dickinson with us. I think you're right. I also think there was no way the Kings were going to do that. So this whole thing, I don't think it ever had much of a chance of coming together, despite the fact, Alan, that we chose to believe or were led to believe that, watch out, something could be happening. JD, what do the Warriors try to do with the rest of the season now?
Yeah, it's a greght question. A lot of frustrated people 90 miles down the road.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. A very frustrated fan base. And I would imagine there's some frustration today that the Kings basically still have the same roster other than Keon's gone and Hunter is there. And obviously Schroeder, they were able to get off Schroeder, but they bring in Hunter. So a lot of disappointed people in the Bay today. Obviously, though, when you look at the Giannis thing, I mean, the Bucks had to want to play ball for that to have any chance of coming to fruition, and the Bucks ultimately didn't trade him. What's left for the Warriors, I think, is they took a flyer on the belief that they can keep Kristaps Porzingis healthy. I don't think that this was a straight salary dump. Obviously, in the worst case scenario, if Porzingis can't play much or be effective, it becomes that at a minimum. It keeps their books in order for the offseason. I still think the Warriors are going to look to be aggressive in the offseason at looking at different things that they can do to try to add to the roster around Steph. But I just think they looked at everything in the last 2 weeks after Jimmy Butler went down and said, hey, this team can't win a title, which, again, the chances were very slim they were going to be able to win a title anyway. I think if there's one thing they probably are disappointed in hindsight now is that from my understanding, and I think more will come out, I know a little bit did earlier, but from my understanding, the Warriors did have a real shot at Jaren Jackson Jr. Had they been able to maybe focus a little bit more on that and not get lost on the Giannis sweepstakes. And then in the midst of them being focused on Giannis and Milwaukee, all of a sudden Utah pops up, swoops in, beats maybe what had been discussed in a potential Warrior deal with Memphis, and he ends up on the Utah Jazz. But as far as the rest of this season, I think that they're gonna try to see if Porzingis can help them and try to get Steph Curry healthy. He's got this knee thing, and I think just play out the season. I think they're far enough in the play-in tournament at this point where I think they're going to continue to try to rise in the standings as much as they can. I think their ceiling is probably the play-in as far as the regular season. I don't think they've got a shot to get to 6 with the team that they have. And then can they navigate the play-in and win a couple of games and then get into a first-round series where they will ultimately get beat, and then it's kind of back to the drawing board. It's unfortunate. I know there's a lot of frustrated people in the Bay about the lack, the hanging on of picks and assets and young players that haven't developed on the Warriors side of things that led to them maybe not being able to make better offers to teams because teams look at a lot of their young talent, maybe like the league looked at a lot of the Kings veteran talent and said, we don't want any of that. Yeah. It's not real valuable. And so it kind of leaves the Warriors licking their wounds a little bit and unfortunately wasting another year where maybe they could try to get Steph Curry that 5th ring, and it'll have to get punted into the summer, at least on that high end.
Yeah, JD, just one more for you on my end. When it comes to, I guess, the future of the Kings and the Warriors, a couple years ago they had the kind of frenemy type of deal. Mike Brown was the coach. De'Aaron was on the team, signed to Steph Curry. It's not like that anymore, which I honestly think might, the rivalry conversation, we can have that conversation a different day, but it's different now. Do you think that there will be any effect on the chances of future Kings-Warrior deals and them happening, not happening? Could they be just around the fringe? Or is business, and if it's a good deal, they'll do it no matter who it is?
I think if it's a good deal, the teams would be comfortable doing a deal. There is a Vivek-Joe Lacob rivalry that goes back to, obviously, Vivek being a minority owner with the Warriors before he became the primary owner in Sacramento. Yeah. And so, those two have a little bit of a history there. I do think the Warriors like to make sure that they win trades on paper, which I think is why today is a particularly difficult day for Joe Lacob. I mean, to see what they ultimately got for somebody that he specifically was as high on, and others in the Warriors organization were not as high on when you look at Jonathan Kuminga. And it's not just Steve Kerr, and it's not just Joe Lacob. There are others who had a higher opinion of what Kuminga should have developed into in year 5. There are others, and I think Mike Dunleavy among them, that were, hey, this thing probably should have been dealt with 2 years ago as it relates to moving Kuminga when his value was higher. But no, I don't think. I think the Warriors always do want to want the perception of winning a trade. And I think, part of, and I will say this, I think part of the Kings, and I don't blame them for doing it, but part of the Kings, interest in Kuminga, and yes, it's, BJ Armstrong, who is maybe higher than any executive in the NBA on Kuminga's potential to be a star or a superstar. But I think there's also, the Kings may be thinking, and again, I don't think less of them for trying, but maybe thinking that they could find the Warriors a little desperate and take a prized player away from Joe Lacob and maybe have it turn into something in Sacramento and have that maybe embarrass the Warriors a little bit. And I do think the Warriors were not willing to facilitate that directly. Obviously, it could still happen down the line, but the Warriors were not going to be willing to facilitate that directly unless they were going to get somebody back that they thought could really help them. But so, sure. I think those teams, though, to answer the question, I don't think those teams would have a problem doing future deals at all because of anything that's happened here in the last few months or few years.
Well, rest in peace, Kuminga Watch, and rest in peace, 2 timeline plan. That also now.
Yeah.
How about that?
Wow.
John Dickinson, we will talk again soon. We'll see you out at the arena. Thank you, JD. We appreciate it.
Alrighty. Thanks, guys, for having me on. Appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Thanks, JD.
So that whole thing, Kuminga, and the Kings, and the Warriors.